Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Rhombus Tix, and I am reading Chapter 4 of the novel Micronation. Chapter 4. The Case of the Nutjob, the Dog, and the Pottery Nook. I found myself reading another book in Prow's sitting room, while Darla presented him with the files she thought he was most likely to choose. After the third one, he opened it up and shouted with delight, "Eureka!" Quiessence Prow was by now my most hated enemy. This was primarily because of Darla. She's the paragon of all femaleness, and she happened to be in love with him. He doesn't return the favor. Stupid. It was all stupid. I looked up from my book. Oh, and what might that be? I hated myself for what I had become here. I had always been a little sarcastic, but now everything that came out of my mouth was dripping with bitterness. Initially, I'd taken the job because my life previously was miserable. Later, I stayed because of the chains of love. The Russian playwright Chekhov once said, "A shotgun introduced on page 1 must go off before the end of the story." So I deliberately put the gun over the fireplace in hopes that he might kill himself with it. Prow said, "This case is set in Alaska. I've been hoping to go back there for some time." I was floored. I had thought he'd completely forgotten about Alaska. "Is this about those JDFLT people?" He looked at me curiously for a moment and smiled. "Oh no, I'm still working on that, old chap. Alaska is the last place we're likely to find out about them anyway. Only the stupidest of criminals return to the scene of the crime. No, I have been meaning to acquire a Toby. I am interested in a particularly rare breed of dog that is only found in the most Arctic climates and bred by the locals. They are quite possessive of them, and thus the dogs are difficult to export. I figure we might as well kill 2 birds with 1 stone." "What about the last dog?" I asked. "He died," Prow replied sadly. "When did that happen?" "About 4 hours ago, when he accidentally got run over by a car." Ah, the sentimental fool. You could tell he was really torn up about the loss of his pet. All he really cared about was having a dog because Sherlock Holmes had a dog. If Sherlock Holmes had a dog, then so must Quiessence Prow. Idiot. I asked, "So you expect to get one of these dogs by going up there in person, even though they won't let anyone else who goes up there in person get one?" Prow nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, of course. I rather doubt that anyone has asked them politely before." "Right," I sighed. "When do we leave?" "Right now," Prow smiled at Darla. "Fire up the plane. The game's afoot." Scene. As you might have guessed, we found the dog in the first few hours upon arrival. It was young, only a year old, and superbly trained. Its owner, Martha, was an older woman who was nearing death, with no family and only a few friends who already had dogs of their own, so she was more than happy to offer to get home. There was, of course, a society that forbids this. However, it turns out that Prow had been old college roommates with the director, and so in a matter of another 45 minutes of furtive phone calls, they had bent the rules, since he was one of the family anyway. "Of course." "Well," Prow said as he paced the room, "now that that's over with, let's go about solving the case. Martha has been kind enough to let us use her home as a base of operations while we go looking about. So, Darla, what are the details?" He fed the dog a biscuit, which ate it savagely. It looked at me as if expecting me to have one. I did not. It growled a little. Darla said, "It's an unusual case, which of course explains why it interested you. Apparently there was a military unit that survived with only 1 loss while they were deployed in the Middle East, and now suddenly 7 of them have died under very mysterious circumstances. The Pentagon is eager to find out what's going on. Their own investigations haven't turned up anything." "Ergo," Prow said, "they called us." Did I mention how much I hated him? I mean, the man had everything handed to him on a silver platter. He was rich, smart, and I admit he's smart, even if he's insane and an idiot, and had the most beautiful female on the planet at his beck and call, which he routinely ignored. The dog was what turned the tide for me, though. Of course, gentle, non-Prowian reader, by now you find me as annoying as Quiessence Prow in my vacillation about Prow. Is he a genius, or is he an idiot? I still don't know the answer, but I'm quite fairly certain he's an idiot savant. He has the ability to find answers to problems in ways that make no sense. He's extremely intelligent in some ways, but utterly lacking in common sense in others. Were he to live alone in the desert, away from anyone else but me as an observer, I would conclude he was an idiot. Yet somehow, he has everyone around him convinced he is amazing, competent, and intelligent, so that I'm forced to constantly remind myself what my own eyes have seen. You might guess that by now I am writing this and making threats that I am, by the end of this yarn, still working for Prow, and that neither of us is dead. It could, I suppose, be a Shyamalanian ending in which we were all dead and I was recollecting the entire thing as a festering corpse from the grave. The worms crawl in, the worms crawl out, but dead men tell no tales. That's about the size of it, Darla replied. Though I have to admit I now believed in fate. Fate had allowed Prow to find the dog. Fate had allowed Prow to find one house in the 20-square-mile area that was right next to the base commander's house. We met with the base commander at daybreak, spring in Alaska. The head of the small battalion met in the mess hall where we were treated with a breakfast of MREs. I'm quite glad that no one of the twisted and strange paths of my life took me into the armed forces. I'd rather eat Twinkies for breakfast. The man's name was Pope. He spoke in a gravelly voice that commanded respect, even though it was relaxed. Doesn't make any sense. Do you know that, until now, people always called us the lucky ones? Despite all the death and the dying over there, we only lost one member of our unit. Now, all of a sudden, they're dying like flies for stupid things. Now they're saying that credit is come due. Superstitious lot. You'd think them more 18th century sailors than 21st century soldiers. I need someone with a clear head and a firm belief in science, not mumbo-jumbo, to find out what's going on here. The dog licked Pope's hand. Maybe it thought he had food. Prow nodded. I can respect that. Normally we handle cases that involve diagnosis. No different here. I want you to find the problem and deal with it. Prow nodded. Yes, but that didn't involve murder. Pope was shocked. Murder? You think someone's killing my men deliberately? Surely the military police investigated it, Darla asked. Pope pounded his desk. They already did. If you think I'm going to allow any of them to keep turning my base upside down when I overheard them talking about ghosts and fate, you better think again. After the third death, my men started getting spooked. I don't want any more nonsense. You seem like you got cold feet, Prow. If you don't want the job, why'd you come here? To get a dog, I smiled, happy to provide accurate information. What? Pope looked at me incredulously. Prow coughed. Darla, as usual, came to his rescue. I think what Prow is concerned about is that, while the idea of diagnosing a disease that no one else has been able to discern is something that interests him, on the offhand possibility there is foul play involved, he might like someone besides me there who can shoot a gun. The dog growled a little at me. I think it could sense my hostility towards Prow. Pope chuckled. Well, why didn't you say so? I'll assign Ryans to the job. Prow looked annoyed at Darla, but did not contradict her. Pope left a short while later, and our bodyguard showed up. Ryan's was a thick slab of meat that looked like the male equivalent of a female video game protagonist. He was more comic book superhero than human. I noticed Darla glanced at his arms admiringly. Not surprising. Even the most besotted can get tired of unrequited love. I should know. Well, how do, folks? What's the sit rep? What can I do for you? Ryans asked. Prow thought about this a great deal and said, I understand that we are to have access to pretty much anything we want. Is that correct? That's right, Ryan said. Anything you want. I want access to the personnel files. Prow pointed at the file cabinet marked office supplies. Ryan's frowned. I don't know. See, there's not a question of top secret versus secret or something like that. Only certain people are supposed to have access to certain things at certain times when it comes to those files. It's supposed to be private and need to know. Prow showed him the letter that had brought us here. Ryan's nodded. Alrighty then, this way. We walked out of the mess hall and down a very cracked and broken asphalt path to the building that was a throwback from the 1950s. He saw the look on my face and nodded proudly. Yep, been there since WW 2.0. The dog looked at Ryan's and whined a bit. Ryan smiled and took something out of his pocket and fed it to the dog. I considered whining. I hadn't had lunch yet. The dog looked at me and glared. Perhaps it sensed, that I, too, was thinking about food. Can dogs really glare? That must take quite a bit of repair work, I said. Not as much as you might think. They built things right back in the day, Ryan beamed. Why was back in the day always so much better than anything they built now? I asked. I thought most of the things they built then were temporary aluminum buildings like the kind that Goldamer Pyle slept in. That was the Marines. His voice had a twinge of annoyance in it. Well, sure, but you still use the same lunchbox buildings in the Army. Chester! Darla shouted at me. Just talking to Ryans, I grinned innocently. Well, stop it and help us look through these files. Darla pointed at a rather thick stack of papers. And so we spent the next several hours looking through files. The truth of the matter was that we were supposed to be helping Prow. He never, or almost never, told us what was going on in his bizarre thought process, so we ended up looking for something unusual. There were all kinds of unusual things. One of the people who died had an incredible love for dogs. Another had been nominated but ultimately rejected from receiving the Congressional Medal of Honor. Another had an intense fear of heights but had drowned in a foot of water inside of their bedroom. But the only useful thing I could get out of reading these files was that for once I actually did agree with Prow. These were murders, not disease victims. I looked up nervously at Ryans, who smiled at me. I couldn't read much into that smile. Perhaps he respected my ability to match wits with him in a verbal sparring. Perhaps he found me a likable fellow. Or perhaps he was staring at the thought of separating my head from my neck. Prow, only an idiot wouldn't think that these were murders, don't you? The deaths are just so coincidental. Prow nodded. I take it you were referring to the young woman who drowned only in a foot of water? Among others, yes. I eyed Ryans nervously. Ryans looked a little annoyed, squinting his eyes, and then smiled the same unreadable smile at me. The dog cocked its head and sniffed Ryan's leg. It growled a little. I squirmed. I don't really think this is something we should be handling. The authorities would only botch this up, Prow said matter-of-factly. My eyes bulged. What, now you think you're a better forensic expert than the FBI? Or the military police? It's not a question of forensics. This is a question of flexible thinking, Prow said. Dead people clues generally means forensics, doesn't it? Darla said. Technically, the definition of forensics is the art or study of formal debate, argumentation. The use of science and technology to investigate and establish facts in criminal or civil courts of law, according to dictionary.com anyway. I sneered. Thank you, Miss Internet. That still doesn't change the fact that there are dead people here and there are all kinds of official law enforcement people to investigate it properly. Yes, but we have been requested to investigate it quietly, Prow replied. So they can cover it up again just like they did the last time? I threw up my hands. There might be an occasion where covering up something is a good idea, Darla said. Like when? I looked at her, even if she didn't look at me. Prow shrugged. An incident involving a biological weapon. If the wrong people got on their hands on it, it could be dangerous. You think we're investigating a biological weapon? My voice was so shrill it could have broken glass. Why? What evidence led him to think that there was a bioweapon? It made no sense. And yet people still thought Prow was a genius. Quite possibly, Prow said. That's why we have to investigate. Great. And so investigate we did. We wandered around the base for some time and met about 200 of its 400 inhabitants. The dog asked all of them for food. It succeeded about 25% of the time. The rest were either sleeping or out on leave. There really didn't seem to be much unusual about it. I mean, I'd never been on a military base before, but it seemed to me like a lot of bed, desks, clothing, and cleaning equipment. I did notice that they seemed to have an awful lot of paperwork. After we were done, I asked Prow, so what was the point of all that? You mean investigating the base for clues? Darla asked. It's what we do. That's why you get paid. I get paid to observe and write. He snickered. Then help solve crimes, too. Darla tapped her clipboard with her finger. So, was it a crime then? I ignored her finger tapping. Prow stopped walking. Actually, Watson, I don't think it was a crime. At least, I don't think it was the conventional sense. I tried to keep walking, but Prow didn't move. You got some kind of a clue then? I considered getting into an argument with Prow about murder versus manslaughter, but I thought better of it. The last thing I needed was for people to think Prow was Perry Mason, too. You could say that. Yes. Prow looked extremely concerned. When something actually concerned Prow, it concerned me. Please note that this was only because being so oblivious to most things, if something actually made it through, then it had to be really bad. What is it? I couldn't help noticing the inordinate amount of pottery wheels. My eyebrows went up involuntarily. So they have a hobby. Some people have hobbies, true, but not to the degree that people do on this base. According to Tobin's Guide of America, roughly 1 in 20 Americans has an interest in pottery. Beyond that, over 75% of those are the ages 42. Thus, statistically speaking, it was an egregious anomaly I noticed. This, combined with Toby detecting higher than normal levels of radiation, caused me to believe that they had been making radioactive pottery. The dog detected higher than normal's levels of radiation, I blinked. Prow was stupid, but he rarely totally lied. Yes, Abercrombie Terriers are trained to detect over 40 different substances by their local trainers. They are among the smartest of canines and can learn at roughly 4 times the speed of any other breed. This is why they are never sold, for the trainers believe that they would dilute the gene pool. Not rational, I know, but I've had to sign several papers requiring me to bring Toby back here at least 1 month each year. The breeding association believed that if they let the dogs out of their control, they'd breed with other dogs that looked the same on the outside but were totally different inside. They also, I think, wanted to maintain an artificially high market value and mystery around the dogs by keeping them largely unknown to the world at large. All right. It took me a moment to absorb the silliness. I decided to believe it, at least the bit about radiation. He might have had a pocket Geiger counter with him for all I know. Stranger things had happened with and Quiescence's Prow had done most of them. Darla sighed out loud. So we're dealing with radioactive pottery here? That would explain why they might be dying of unusual causes. We should check the pottery and the clay they're using for trace amounts of radiation. That is an excellent idea. He smiled and winked at Darla. What was that? Prow usually barely even acknowledged that Darla existed. That and the fact that Darla was starting to give him ideas did not speak well for my job prospects. I was the guy that was supposed to do that. What if Darla learned to write stunning interactive fiction, too? So we spent the next 2.5 hours wandering around the base while the dog sniffed at pottery. The dog, of course, went berserk. I didn't care. After that, I insisted that we use an actual Geiger counter. I didn't know how to read the thing at first, but after Darla explained the base's radiation to me levels to me, it made me want to leave. It's everywhere here. It's a wonder these people still have any hair left, I shouted. Not that you can tell that easily when it's all shaved off. So what do you think we should do now? I asked. We should speak to the base commander, Darla said. Yes, we should, Prow nodded. We went back with our findings. Pope was not happy with our results. Where in the world is this coming from? If you're willing, I can collect samples, Prow said. Now more freaking samples! That won't be necessary, Pope replied. We can take it from here. There are procedures to be followed. As you wish, Prow sighed. He was clearly disappointed. We left, and it almost escaped when Pope's security came running after us. Wait, he wants to see you again, which caused all of us to pile out of the car and walk back to the office across the parking lot. Pope was waiting at his door. He looked shaken. Apparently I was wrong. You can go ahead and collect those samples now. Darla looked skeptical. Why did you change your mind? Instructions from higher up the food chain, way up. Darla looked at Prow. This doesn't feel right. She seemed to be having difficulty standing up. She always got that way when she got too emotional. It was cataplexy, a side effect of narcolepsy. She had to be a lot more upset than her face let on. We're taking the samples, Pow said dictatorially, yet with a tone of a stern, confident father figure. And so we began to take samples. We swabbed all kinds of areas all around the barracks first, but after a short while began to focus entirely on the clay. Prow was a wizard with a spectrometer. The tests he did were not garden variety mix and matching of chemicals to catalog reactions. He just DNA gel up a sample, put it in, and identify it based on the records read out in seconds. I thought at first he was faking, but much to my delight, he turned out to be actually good at something after all. Still, his skill at it meant that Darla and I spent more time gathering samples while he looked at what we brought back. I decided it was now or never. I asked Darla while we were alone, Darla, you want to go out sometime when we get back? What do you mean? She asked. Her expression on her face was unreadable. I thought maybe we could go to a movie or something. Are you asking me out? She smiled warmly. Yes, actually, I was relieved by her relaxed tone. If we have a conversation like this again, I'm filing a formal charge of sexual harassment with the State Labor Board. She smiled and kept collecting samples. What? Well, what part of what I said don't you understand? She said sweetly. Well, it seems a bit extreme. This is my job. I don't need to deal with this, she continued with her sample work. Oh, please. Like, this nonsense is a job in any normal sense. We are play actors for Prow. I consider it my job. I can't speak for you, she said. Are you attracted to him? So what if I am? That's between Prow and me, and you haven't seen me bring it up, have you? She looked dangerous. No, but good. Then shut up. She said that last rather hurriedly and pointedly, ignored me while she went on collecting samples. We got everything we needed and walked back. Prow smiled at us, looking at the spectrometer with a wide grin. I seldom saw him use. If he detected anything of the tension between Darla and me, he didn't say it. I have figured out what it is. And, I asked, trying not to look at Darla, it's depleted duranium. Depleted duranium mixed with Kevlar and clay. What in the world? I scratched my head. I think they made body armor out of it, Prow said proudly. And I think that they are still making it. Indeed, I think they're making up a whole new batch. Why would they use depleted uranium and clay? Ceramics are a tough material. Properly heated and processed, it can be one of the most durable substances on Earth. Sure, and Kevlar and depleted uranium are also just armor, I replied, but they don't mix together. Kevlar is what they put is what it is because of fiber, not because of the actual material itself. It's a combination thing. I thought I'd read that in a book somewhere. Darla said, modern buildings have steel frameworks even though they are made of far flimsier materials. It doesn't make any sense, I replied. Prowl brought us a computer screen with pretty diagrams. Yes, it does, especially when you add the depleted uranium. No CO in their right mind is going to approve of soldiers mixing in body armor because of the liability and political issues. Radiation is not a popular subject among certain folks. I said, that's insane. And even if it were true, they're doing it to themselves. Yes, that's correct, Prow said. I tried to smile good-naturedly at Darla. She smiled back as long as Prow was looking, but as soon as he looked away, she gave me the stare of death. I stopped smiling. Darla thought for several moments and said, so there really are murders after all? They really were murders after all? Prow nodded. How did we go from radiation sickness to murder? Because low levels of radiation are harmful over the long term, but in short doses, not inherently dangerous. That doesn't mean that it's going to be approved. But if you found a way to improve body armor dramatically, and it meant life and death for the unit, which never got you the armor you wanted in the first place, would you tell them about it? Worse, what would you do if someone else started threatening to tell about it? 400 people is an awful lot to keep secret. It might work in combat in another country where it is you against everyone else, but it wouldn't really work once. Would it really work once they returned? Darla smiled and shook her head. Nope. She didn't seem disturbed by our earlier encounter, but I wasn't going to let it show. So what do we do now? Tell Pope, Darla said. How do you know they tried to tell Pope? Why were you allowed to tell Pope as much as you did then? What if they've been murdering all the other people around here that tried to tell Pope before? Do you really think they're going to try and let us talk to him? I asked. Yes, actually, I know they will. And why is that? Because they've been listening to us the entire time with their surveillance equipment and haven't done anything about it. What? I said. Why didn't you tell us? Prow calmly pointed to the window. Well, what good would that have done? You probably would have acted nervous and other such nonsense. We haven't got a thing to worry about. And why is that? Darla asked, herself now nervous. Prow pointed at us. Because each of you has a bug on you. And if they did anything to us, then the authorities would arrest them. Darla looked horrified. Wait, you've been listening to us the whole time? Oh, no, that would be impolite. I simply have it recorded back on the plane. Prow patted her head reassuringly. Darla ignored the condensation pat in her visible relief as Prow not having heard our conversation. At least that's what I assumed it was, given her deliberate desire not to talk about her thing for Prow. I said, I hate to be a party pooper, but have you ever heard of jamming equipment? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that the military has equipment that can make sure that our broadcast doesn't get out. Prow nodded. Yes, that's true, but they would have had to know about it in the first place. A squeal of tires could be heard in the distance. What was that? I said, looking around for sniper fire. That was the people listening in on us, driving to the plane to find the recordings I've made while they send a few other people around back to attack us, Prow said confidently. That's not a good thing, Darla said. None of us have weaponry. Nonsense. I'm always armed. Granted, One pistol is not much against most equipment, but we'll make do. Of course, we only have a limited amount of time until they discern that there is no black box recording our statement. What? I said, looking out the window. I didn't say anything. I lied, Prow said. I made it all up. Don't worry. They're jamming us now, so I can't call someone to have them hide the box. And how do you know that? Because my cell phone isn't getting any reception, he pointed at his phone. At that moment, the door burst open and two rather large gentlemen, Ryan's being one of them, pointed assault rifles at us and were about to pull the trigger. Prow shot the gun out of the hand of one of them. I think if it hadn't been for the fact that they wanted to make this look like another accident, we would have been dead. They shot me with a dart gun, and I could feel something pumping into my veins. There were all kinds of pretty colors welling up in my head, and I noticed them shoot at Darla, but she dodged out of the way. Things went in slow motion after that. I tried to fight them, but I was told afterward that it was more of a tap on the cheek of one of the soldiers. That made him giggle as he thrust me to the floor. Apparently it was at least enough of a distraction to allow an opening. It was the stupid dog that had been sitting there the entire time at Prow's feet that leapt up and bit one of the others in the most vulnerable space, forcing him to drop the assault rifle to the ground. It was just wrong. Wrong! Prow and Darla rushed the guy on top of me and thrust him to the ground. Darla took the dart gun out of his hands and shot both the soldiers point blank. I could swear she had the most sadistic grin I've ever seen on another human being. Time passed. Prow was mad as hell. You mean to tell me that we had a defense secret of national implications and my men, or Pope was mad as hell. You mean to tell me that we had a defense secret of national implications and my men were sitting on it the whole time? Prow smiled. I wouldn't worry about it too much, General. The best investigators that the military couldn't find it either. Pump grunted. And you could. A thorough collection of samples and a belief in the scientific method are invaluable in my profession. I sat brooding back in the monolithic library mess that Prow called home. Pope had thanked Prow for his services and let us go. Nothing happened. There was no media coverage of it at all. It was like so many things we did, terribly anticlimactic. And yet it wasn't. I knew beyond any doubt that someone up the food chain had taken a recipe for tougher body armor and was trying to figure out a way to use it without the radiation showing up in a scan. Of course, I'd like to think that they were trying to eliminate the radiation entirely. Darla acted like nothing much happened. She was so relaxed around me that it made my stomach lurch. I finally figured it out. She had never cared for me, never even wanted to get to know me better. There was nothing. She'd only gotten annoyed when I brought it up because it reminded her of her situation with Prow. I found myself repeatedly eyeing the shotgun and trying to find ways to use it. I could bide my time. I had a new hobby in life. The destruction of Quiessence Prow.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright
2022!
To fight the forces of evil!
So here we are on the secret commentary of Chapter 4, where I talk about how much my own work sucks. It still sucks. This chapter was the best of the 4 so far. I think that it's the most coherent of the four. The characters actually act like characters. We start to see an arc and a conflict and a dynamic between the two of them instead of just three random people showing up and looking into things. I normally do. I usually find a way to anticipate critical answers and bypass them. For example, with my steampunk book, I got around a lot of problems by changing the past. And since it is literally an entirely different timeline, if I was wrong that the Muskegee axe handles of the Civil War in 1962, wore gray uniforms instead of pink uniforms, then I could say, well, fuck that, because in this point in time, that happened, right? I mean, I can't completely ignore history or completely ignore cultures or completely ignore the laws of physics, but it gives me a lot more freedom. Technically speaking, these books are set on Terra, but I didn't say that at the time, and there's nothing in the intro or anything else that indicates that this is not some near future Earth. And, the genre is action/fringy science. So, limited bad mistakes is one thing, but I'm sorry, dogs detecting radiation with their smell? Look, I could maybe buy training a dog to detect radiation sickness, but I'm pretty sure that dogs cannot detect radiation by smell. Maybe they can. I don't know. But I think so far of everything I put into the 4 chapters and everything I remember that's coming in the book, given my current knowledge of science, that may be the most fucking ridiculous thing I've ever written. Maybe not. Certainly the most egregious abuse of science. But again, maybe not. Characters are still assholes. There's nothing that is engaging a reader at this point, except for maybe, is there a larger conspiracy, and if so, what is it? Or, this book is written by my friend, so I'm going to try and finish it and make a good faith try, right? There's nothing. A properly done novel should, on the first page, even the first paragraph, immediately pull you in and make you keep writing or keep reading and make you want to keep spending time with that character. My first novel, to its credit, while it's not perfect, does that, right? There's a big explosion, and she is investigating this alien artifact, and the alien artifact creates a duplicate of her fantasy world, and it causes all kinds of problems, and the secret to controlling the ability to do that is a tennis match between the good guys and the bad guys. And good guys eventually win, right? Whereas Micronation is basically a slowly unraveling conspiracy theory intended to start out with an episode of the week style series of short stories that start getting more and more integrated, and then eventually becomes a political drama about a small group of people that want to set up their own independent nation on the ocean. Neither of those two ideas is bad. I could write a compelling novel from scratch with either of those ideas. Bolting them together is asking for problems. So I guess the biggest thing is if I had to write the novel over again, I would completely decouple A from B, or at least do a much better job of making the conspiracy much more intriguing and the characters much more engaging, because just because you sit down and write something doesn't mean that people want to read it. And to me, this was a 100,000 word lesson in pain and frustration that took multiple years to write, with very little forethought about the end result. And as a result, this is what you get. You get something that has individually compelling elements, that gets a little better over time, but has problems. So at this point, short of just never doing anything with it, I think using it as a writing teaching tool is about the best I can do.